thing.
Or alternatively, I'll witter and it'll be recorded. That's the difference. So I'm very grateful to Linda for stepping in, but I'm sure you want to do some intros, do you?
I do, yes, please, if you don't mind.
Right,
good evening, everybody. This is the MFEN lecture on the art of negotiation, and I have negotiated and cajoled and perhaps bullied Brian into coming along on this International Nurses Day to talk to us on that subject. So Brian, I don't think anybody really needs to be introduced to you, but feel free to stand there and say your piece on who you are and introduce yourself.
I'm Brian Dolan. I was born when I was very young and I'm not dead yet.
No, that was noticeable.
Still pink and breathing.
Yeah, the ABC was working for me as you arrived in this evening.
Yes, I'll do my best to avoid the disability and exposure later.
That would be excellent, preferably not on Zoom.
No, exactly. Yeah, as Linda has discovered when she looked at the hashtag called me. So yes, I'm Brian Dolan. I work for Linda Holt, my boss, and Director of Health Service 360, also a Professor of Leadership in Healthcare at Salford, but also Professor in Queensland, and a few other bits of pretentious things. So that probably is more than enough about me, I think. But also the proud co-author with Linda of the Dolan and Holt Emergency Care Theory into Practice, which Linda and I are working on for the 4th edition right now. So this is well overdue, but work in progress.
Yeah.
But it feels I would never be able to bully Linda, but I certainly cajoled and actually now pleaded would she be happy to come and join. So I'm so grateful. So this is a co-produced
lecture, is it?
Co-produced.
Are you coming back when Linda's lecturing later in the summer to do a co-produced one then, or are you leaving her to do that one solo?
I think if she says, if she wants me to, 100% I'm in there. And if not, she'll do a better job anyway. So Linda, about you.
Well, apart from the fact that I had about 10 minutes notice for this.
That's true. That is very true. You've been very kind. So.
But yes, I think you guys on the call mostly know me too. I have a long background in emergency care. I've been broadly involved with FEN since its inception, and very proud to be so. And I currently work with nurses a lot, healthcare professionals generally, in staying well, leading well, and delivering the best possible care that we can give, but with an absolute emphasis on the first, because I think we're really good at looking after everybody else, not so very good at looking after ourselves.
That's true.
The sea of nods then.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yes, that's negotiating that. So I haven't particularly got slides. We thought we'd just we'd talk about stuff, but
right.
So I think everyone knows the rules by now, roughly around the thing about recording and all that stuff. But it's an intimate group, so it'll feel like more of a chat, I think, than anything else. But one of the things that and I suppose in terms of learning actually just better understanding what negotiation versus bargaining and characteristics and stuff like that, and also an exercise we'll do in a while, which is a good example of negotiating that we'll get you to do for the crack. All 4 of you. So as I see it, and Linda will chip in and as we often mix up negotiation with bargaining, and bargaining is something that's competitive in that it's a win-lose. It's quite binary. So when you are haggling, when you are bargaining, you're bargaining for the best deal you can get, which means in practice that you win and somebody loses, or vice versa. Whereas negotiations are something quite different, because actually what you're seeking is a win-win, where each side is looking to find a mutually acceptable solution. And it really matters that it's mutually acceptable, and that's why they're negotiations. Right now, and we'll certainly use the example of Ukraine and Russia a fair bit. They're so far apart in terms of their negotiations. It's impossible to see things, especially when the outside actor, which in this case is Putin, has essentially got the negotiators' arms behind their backs. So they're not really doing any meaningful negotiation. This is bargaining at the moment. And what they're bargaining is landmass, and for him, it's about Ukraine has to lose for him to win. For Ukraine, it's a very different experience, because for them, it's their own land. So their paradigm of this is that they're not actually out to bargain. They actually want to negotiate, and the only deal they will accept is not one decided. It's not going to be mutual. This will be one where it gets the Russians off their land. So what that infers is it's never quite as straightforward as people think. It's not like two sides sit behind the table and we'll find a way to make a win-win solution, because it's very context bound as well. And if you, sorry, anyone, please do chip in, because we're not going to keep going for 2 hours on this, just to reasure you. Any thoughts, observations?
Are you talking to me now?
I suppose
Or do you want me to wait till the how-to bit? We've written this really well.
Yeah, well, it was so sophisticated. I mean, any thoughts on observations on that so far? Because this, as we said, is a conversation more than it is a lecture, as I see it. So
I hadn't really thought of bargaining versus negotiation. If I think of bargaining in the professional context rather than the haggling context, where I put myself into a souk that I've never visited, bargaining for me is that bit that we find often in end of life situations or difficult diagnosis situations. And I know when I've talked before, certainly about things like child death, I always talk about that bargain that the parents are prepared to do with the doctor, that yes, you can have my child as a research subject, but in return what I want is more days with my child, more time with my child. And so for me, that's a bit more of a transaction, but it's a bargain, because they're bargaining on the research trial being sufficiently successful that they'll get what they want. And the doctor has to have a research subject, because otherwise they can't try out some new treatments.
Do the research. So I think I would think of that as a negotiation more than bargaining. The reason being is that both sides need to win for it to be successful.
Right.
So for the family members, it's additional time with their child. For the medical team, the win for them is a research participant. So sorry, go ahead, Linda.
It is interesting though, because I would have interpreted it similarly to Jeanette. Yeah, in that for me, bargaining almost has a bit of desperation about it. Is, I am hankering for something and I will do whatever it takes to get that something. Whereas done well, not often, but done well, negotiation is the coming together of equals, so both get what they need out of it. But bargaining, if and it may just be my own unconscious bias to it, but bargaining for me always feels like I've got to get what I need because it matters so much. And so there is that more of that air of desperation about it, and I'll make the trade-offs that I need to make in order to get what I want.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, no, I see the point. But the bargaining is often a win-lose, and actually sometimes you're giving away more than you want to. It depends on what the price is for you and the value, more importantly.
It always will. But I mean, if we stick with my example,
then
the doctor is likely to win because they get a research subject, and it kind of, the outcome doesn't overall, I'm not saying they're inhumane, but the outcome doesn't matter because they've got another research subject. So N equals more than one.
Yeah, and
that contributes to their research study, whatever that might be,
Mm.
the parents may not gain anything, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work and they don't get what they want out of it. But it's a bit of a chance, isn't it? So I see where you're coming from, Linda. That's a bit of a desperate situation. I'll do whatever it takes to get me what I want, but I kind of understand I might not get that. And therein, I think sometimes is the complaint, because I didn't get what I wanted, but I gave you what you wanted.
Yeah.
To me, though, it's the concept of that balance of power, isn't it? In bargaining, who's got the power? There is sometimes a bit of a inequality, isn't there, in bargaining? With somebody having more of the power, like the doctor or the clinician ultimately has more power in that scenario that you're talking about there, Jeanette, where negotiation seems to be a little bit more, we're on an equal level, we've got a problem, we need to solve it, and we're going to do it together. Oh, it's an interesting thought.
And I think Ukraine is the same as that at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really, you know, they're not bargaining there, but they're actually not really in a position to negotiate either, because they have, you know, they have been overrun, or and are in a position of defending and clawing back whatever they can. And yeah, I think that you can only bargain when you've got something to offer back. You can only negotiate when you've got something to offer back. But when you haven't got anything to offer back, or you are the one that stands to lose everything, you have to bargain, because you kind of almost at the gift of the other person. And as you say, the power is unequal.
That's right. My best friend, going back to that end of life argument, my best friend died of cancer 5 years ago, and he was always looking for the moonshot, as he called it. He was always hopeful that the moonshot cancer drug would come. And he lived in Swindon. He went to Oxford quite near towards the end. And he went to Oxford, and he was distraught on the way back because they wouldn't accept him.
For a research trial? For a research trial.
He just did not meet the criteria for the research trial. And for the researchers, they are also in a bind, because they want to get research participants, but to do it ethically, and also to do a piece of work which has validity. You can't be all inclusive to everyone. You have to have it. So in that respect, it's a Faustian pact, in the sense. So whether we talk about negotiation or bargaining, it's in those cases, it's a pact where there is something to lose for all parties. There's something to gain for all parties, but it's not an equal relationship at all. And when I hear people talking about, oh, patients are our partners, I'm thinking, that's just complete nonsense. They never, ever, ever can or will be our partners in care, because we control knowledge, we control pain relief, we can control whether they get seen by anyone, how soon they wait to be seen. We have got inordinate power over patients. There is no way they can meaningfully negotiate or even bargain in some respects, unless it's something that actually is in our interest. So it's a bit like the word empowerment. The empowerment is fine if it's an equal relationship. It's not fine if one person. So like what I think of as is I think about it as the watering can metaphor. The person with the real power is not the plant, it's the watering can. And that can be withdrawn at any time. So yes, Linda, please do.
So I thought it might be useful to explore some of the ways that we can and should negotiate powerfully, because in the broader context, we could go down a lot of rabbit holes about what is negotiation, what isn't negotiation, what is it that we're drawing on. But in the end, in practical terms, it doesn't matter what label you give it, it's how you do it and whether you do it effectively for the things that you need. And I think for years of working in emergency care and years of working with nurses particularly, but all health professionals, you know, we can be pretty rubbish at it. You know, we don't necessarily ask for what we want, or we ask for it in such a gilded way that nobody actually understands what we're asking for. And we're almost taught this kind of notion of, you know, make it sound like their idea, you know, to dance around until they come up with the idea that you've been seeding for a long time. And then when we don't get what we want, we're really quite miserable about it. You know, it's like, oh, nobody takes any notice of nurses, we've got the answers and blah, blah, blah. And I'm being super generalist. And what you tend to find is the people that rock up on these type of calls, the people that get involved with things like FEN, actually are not those people, because you're already taking action to develop yourselves. You're already invested. But when you take the profession as a mass, there are more people that take the path of least resistance than there are people who go out of their way to equip themselves to deal with some of these thorny things that happen in our daily work lives. And I think we pay a high price for that in the terms of our mental well-being, and what we finish up having to sacrifice and having to compromise because we didn't get the negotiation part right in the beginning. So I have a few golden rules for how you do negotiation, and then a whole lot of slightly more woolly looking rules about how you connect with people that enable that negotiation to be possible. So I'm going to just start off with my golden rules, and then we'll just play around with it. Whenever we negotiate for something that we want, we're invested in it to some extent. It matters to us to some degree, else we wouldn't bother to stick our head above the parapet in the first place. What we often don't do, though, is think through how that matters to us, why it's important to us, and what we're prepared to do or not do for it. So for me, negotiation is about preparation and pre-planning. And the more you get into the habit of doing that for the things that you've got time to do that with, the easier it is to negotiate with somebody on the fly. And, you know, we've all been in the emergency waiting room with somebody that's been thoroughly unreasonable, and you have to negotiate with them on the fly. The better trained you are to do this stuff when you've got time to do it properly, the more easily, the more muscle memory you've got, if you like, to be able to do this in a situation where the outcome really matters, but you haven't got time to think it through because your brain is used to doing that. Your, if you like, your mental muscle will find the answers for you and spot the things that you need to see. So in the preparation phase, the most important thing that you do is you think about what it is that you are trying to achieve, you know, what it is that matters about what you're trying to achieve, and what that means to you. When you're really clear about what you're trying to achieve, then the other person has a chance of engaging with you on that. When you're not clear, they maybe don't know what they're negotiating for, or they may be not quite sure how to engage with you. When you kind of fluff around stuff, not quite asking for what you want, it's very much more difficult for the other person to say yes, or for the other person to negotiate on that with you. So first of all, be super clear to yourself about what the ask is, what it is that you're trying to achieve, and why that is important. When you've got those things, and only when you've got those things, think about the other parties involved in the negotiation. What is it that they want? What's important to them in terms of outcome? And where's the common ground? Because that gives you a starting point, a talking point. So there's a really old story that Brian and I, in fact, those of you that used to be around the A&E conference circuit back in the day have probably seen me talk about this there, even it's that old. But, you know, the story of the mum that's got twin girls that are fighting over the last orange in the basket. And the girls are screaming and shouting and fighting over this orange. And so in the end, mum's had enough, you know, her last nerve has just been broken. She snatches at the orange, chops it in half, gives them half each and says, now go away and be quiet. Both girls dissolve into tears immediately. And she said, well, you've both got some orange. What's the matter with you now? And the first little girl said, well, I only wanted the peel to make some shapes with. And the other girl said, well, I just wanted the juice to suck. And in not asking what the other people wanted, the mum made a compromise and failed to negotiate with either of them and failed to satisfy either of them. And I think in the hustle and bustle of busyness of our day, this is what we do all the time. This is what we assume we know what somebody wants, and we try hard to couch our negotiations in a way that make them look like they're getting what they want. We haven't bothered to stop and ask the question. So rule number one about negotiation is absolutely know what you want. Rule number two is do your very best to know what they want. As much of that as you can do ahead of time is great. If you can't get it ahead of time, you have to take the time to ask the question during the negotiation, because at the very least, the other person's going to feel like they're getting a fair hearing. And in getting a fair hearing, they're much more connected with you. They're much more likely to want to reciprocate and give you a fair hearing too. When you've thought about what it is that you want, you've then got to do two things. Three things, I guess, is what you want is your gold standard. What you settle for is between there and there are your area of play, if you like. This is the range that you've got to move within. So if you've got your bottom line, this is what I'd settle for. Imagine you're selling your car, for example. You want £5,000 for your car. In an ideal world, you need £4,500 to pay off your finance and other bits and pieces that you might have on this car. So your top line want is £5,000. You absolutely can't go below this is £4,500. So that ultimately is your red line. I can't negotiate below there because I've lost out if I do that. Your £500 between that, if you like, is what you'll settle for. That's your area to play with. And I think, it's kind of easy to do that. And I would always do that if I went into a suit, Jeanette. I'd kind of know what it is that I am after, if I've got the currency conversion right, what it is that I'm prepared to pay for that thing. And if I can't get that, I have to be prepared to walk away. And, somebody's got to look you in the eye and believe that you will walk away from the negotiation if you can't meet your red line. So that they will be my golden rules for negotiation. And you can apply that to pretty much anything from negotiating with your children to negotiating over funding shift patterns to negotiating with somebody that is stressed out in the waiting room. And I think that the key to getting that negotiation is that bit of conversation about who wants what and where can we meet in the middle. What do you think about that? And Brian, do you want to add anything to that?
I'd be putting in, it's really very, very important to not make assumptions. And the example of the orange is a really good example of that. But also, negotiations sometimes have more than two parties, and there's a negotiator who is neutral to help them to do so. Senator George Mitchell in the 90s, when he was sent by Bill Clinton to find was there a way to sort out the warring factions in Northern Ireland, he got both sides to sit down across from each other. That itself took a couple of months of negotiation, and one of which included they could not be seen or photographed shaking hands with each other. Couldn't happen. Because it was about the optics to everybody else. What will they think if they see Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness shaking hands? So their own communities would have torpedoed the negotiations before they got it up to ground. And that took a bit of work to do. But what Sir George Mitchell did is when he got them around the table, eventually, he said, right, instead of asking the question, what do you want from this negotiation, he asked something more fundamental, which is, what would you want for the future of Northern Ireland? which is a subtle but quite different question. And what they wanted, each side, what is like Ian Page's as well, we want peace, we want our Protestant community to feel safe, we want our children not to have to go overseas to find work because there's been, the workplaces have been bombed. We want some investment into the country. Yes, Martin Guinness, what do you want? Well, we don't want our children having to go overseas because there's no work. We don't want them to have to, we want them to feel growing up that they'll be safe. We want a better education. We want investment. They wanted exactly the same things, but they'd never sat down to find out, because they'd worked on an assumption that each one wanted everything and there would be no give without them. The outcome of that story, as a by the way, is, and Fiona will know this well, is that Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness, from two traditions, wholly opposite ways of seeing the world, they became such famously good friends. They were always laughing at the Chuckle Brothers. They became known as the Chuckle Brothers because they were always laughing at each other's jokes. That's who they became. Oh, thank you. Just been brought. Love you. Just been brought a cup of tea and a biscuit. What is not to love about that? Didn't even have to negotiate or bargain for it.
No, that's because the ground rules are already known, aren't they?
Absolutely.
So it circles back to Linda's points about the ground rules. When you know what those ground rules are, and if you're looking to create something new that maybe neither party could attain on their own. You're going in with a constructive spirit and heart. Sorry, Linda, you're going to say something, I think.
No, I think there's two really important things in here. One is, my very basic practicals of how you do it. And then, as you rightly say, the how you get to the resolution when it looks like everybody's poles apart. So if we start with, how do you do it? How many of you take the time to think about what it is that you're trying to achieve before you dive in? How many of you think about what are the red lines that you won't cross, you won't allow to happen? Do you go through that, or do you tend to just blunder about and hope for the best, like most?
I think until fairly recently, I'd have just dived in and then whinged about, nobody ever listens. You don't get where if you just listen, I could sort this out. But our Deputy Chief Operating Officer asked me a very interesting question. I went to see her to try and convince her that we needed to do something that I knew was going to be difficult, but ultimately beneficial. And she sat there, and I thought I'd been really clear about what my ask was and my rationale. And she just sat there, and she was obviously confused. And she said, "So what problem are we trying to solve?" And that really struck me, because I'd not really framed it that way before. And if you ask that question, actually really kind of stops everyone in their tracks, and they go, okay, hang on. Firstly, is there a problem? Because if there isn't, shall we just pack up and go home now? Because that would save us all a lot of bother on all sorts of levels. If there is a problem, can we define it? And if we can't define it, what can we do about that? And if we can define it, then let's start on what sort of numbers does that look like? What sort of qualitative data have we got on that? What can we say about that problem that may lead us to a solution? So now I always go, right, hang on, what problem are we trying to solve? And that really does help when I'm trying to get something across to other people.
And
so that's my kind of clarity of questioning there.
Yeah, and it is critical, isn't it? Because otherwise, and Brian and I, you'll not be surprised to know, do this all the time. We'll be getting very heated about something, and Angela, who's our ops manager, will come along and say, you two do know you're both arguing the same point from different angles, don't you?
Constantly.
Because we haven't got that, that absolute clarity of what is it that we're trying to solve.
What is the ask?
Yeah.
Yes, I get that one a lot. So what is the ask? And you think, I don't know.
Actually, one of the other, and Liz is so true on this one. is it's more than even what's the ask, is what is the understanding. So you can come at the same problem, but you're standing on different sides of the problem instead of walking around the problem. And we literally do, Linda and I. I think last week was an example, to do with presentations of a major leadership program we're running in Somerset. And I wasn't spending enough time looking to understand where Linda was coming from, because I had a fixed understanding of what it is, having done it many times before. Linda was coming in from it from a different angle, and it was only a slightly different lens, but a slightly different understanding is not the same as completely different understanding. And where negotiations are important is people spending enough time doing problem identification and problem clarification.
I think it's even more fundamental than that, isn't it, though? Because what happens when we go into a negotiation is not we can get clarity of problem and clarity of ask, and that's massively important. But the minute we get into that, this really matters a lot to me, and I know what I'm asking, and it really matters, is all of a sudden our logical brain stops driving the bus and the monkey's driving the bus. And the minute that happens, we've got all sorts of neurochemicals sloshing around, and we're not rational, we're not connected, we don't see the other person's point of view as easily as we could do. We're right into almost like monkey brain overdrive. And I think a couple of things happen here that stop us from negotiating effectively. We go into fear of getting it wrong, fear of not getting our own way, fear of being judged for our opinions, and very, very judgy about what it is that the other person's doing or saying. We run all these kind of scenarios and create all these what ifs of what the outcomes might be without having done that work first of, what do I think the other person wants? What am I prepared to settle for? And where are my absolute red lines? And when you've pre-programmed yourself with that, it's easier to stay on track. It's really difficult to do that in the moment. And you finish up then maybe bargaining and giving away more than you want to, rather than negotiating. And then you come away angry at yourself, angry at the situation, because you haven't actually got what you wanted, or you've given away something that really mattered. And I think that the way round that is this notion of, how do I stay in control of my neurology in a way, and accepting the fact that for the vast majority of the time, we make decisions based on emotion. We have interactions based on emotion. We explore what's possible based on emotion. So if we know that, let's lead with that. And if we lead from a position, if you like, of compassion and connection, we stand a much better chance of getting what we want, or at least not giving away something we don't want to give away. And the way we do that is to really take a very big breath sometimes. And I do remember my early days as a emergency department manager, and I'm going back to like pre-millennium, and the consultant in charge of the department was very much used to being the consultant in charge of the department. And he's kind of looked at me and he's like, yeah, well, you're just a little bit of a thing, I'm going to have you in tears within the first week or two. And that was his objective, at which point my negotiation skills went through the floor. And the only thing that I was left with is, I am not going to cry in front of him. I don't care what he does. I'm not going to cry in front of him, which is a pretty rubbish way of trying to run an emergency department and manage 100 staff, isn't it? But every time I went into a meeting, the thing that was at the forefront of my mind was, he's not going to make me cry. And after a couple of weeks of this, I thought, I have got to get a grip, because, I'm now not showing up as the best version of myself. I'm showing up as the version of myself that's not going to be intimidated by this bloke who's clearly intimidated me because I'm not behaving like I would normally behave. So after having a word with myself, and a few weeks later, he stormed out of his own office, having thrown his cup of tea up in the air in rage because he couldn't get his own way with me. And after that, we had quite a good working relationship. But that came down to me having to say, you know, my voice is representative of, you know, 100 nurses and porters and HCAs and stuff who are following me. If I don't stand up for what we want to achieve, if I don't stand up for what we want to believe in, we're all doomed. And that was the thing that changed it for me. You know, in a way, the clarity was, this is so much bigger than me. I'm not standing here trying to negotiate out of a churlishness. I'm standing here negotiating because it's important, because it matters, and because we need to do the right thing. After he'd calmed down, he did come back and say, actually, you know, the things that you are saying, and I think the argument was over something that was going on in the waiting room in terms of reception staff. What you're saying is right, and it's the right thing for patients. I just don't like being told what to do. And we found our groove. But it would have been so easy to say, you know, he's, and I don't use the word glibly, but, you know, he's trying very hard to bully me because he thinks that that's the way that he's behaved with previous managers. And, you know, it was no accident that managers rarely stayed more than a year in that department. And he's always got away with it. When you treat people adult to adult, when you don't let them off the hook for their behavior, they'll quickly come back to the negotiating table. But it takes real guts in the first place to put yourself in that position of negotiate to negotiate. And when you're tired, when you're stressed, it's much easier to just keep going in the cycle that you've always been in and put up with the stuff that you've always put up with. So I guess what I'm saying here is step 2 is about courage and connection. Because when you do that, connect human to human, when you approach something with compassion over judgment, it's really difficult for somebody to be really nasty and judgy back, because we spread this, you know, I'm not going to get into quantum physics and stuff, but we spread this emotion from one to another. You know, you can walk around ED and you can pick up on, oh, she's in a really bad mood today, I'm staying away from her. You know, we catch it off each other, don't we? And compassion and connection is exactly the same. So when you go into a negotiation, look at those points of connection first. Look at, you know, whether it's making some social comment or whether it's something that just brings you onto a level, human being to human being, because you've got much more room for maneuver there than if you are coming in with seeing the other person up there, or if you're up there seeing the other person down there, they're going to do what I want. When you get this equal to equal, human to human connection, it's much more difficult for the other person to come back and be completely unreasonable. Is that manipulative? Well, once you know, don't you? And you know, once you've got this tool in your armory, you might as well use it kindly and get a proper negotiation that respects both people's point of view. Even if you don't get your own way. I mean, there's been plenty of times in our own business and with other, you know, with people at work, other workplaces and stuff, that I haven't got my own way, but I've been able to come out of it not feeling bad because of the way the negotiation was handled. I've had plenty of experiences where I've come away feeling like this big and really silly because of the way the negotiation was handled, or the other person thought they'd managed the situation. But I think if we can keep that sense of self for people, they can accept not getting their own way. They can accept a negotiation that hasn't maybe delivered everything that they want because they don't feel got at, damaged or belittled as a human. Does that make sense?
I think everything you said is right. And the other thing that things is about the importance of establishing rapport and establishing the relationship and where that comes from. You know, the evidence shows that 70%, whatever model that is used, whether you use Jungian psychology or whatever it is, you know, whether it's counseling, whether it's coaching, whatever it is, negotiating, 70% of the success is actually based on the ability to strike up, to establish a rapport. It's really very hard to negotiate where there is no trust and people just do not like each other. And one doesn't have to love somebody, but when you're negotiating from a place of mutual respect, there is far more willingness to connect and more willingness to lean into the discomfort, because the desire is, I want to help this person because I know they'll want to make it. And that's why trust is central to any good negotiation. And often when they talk about negotiations breakdown, it's not the negotiations that are broken down, it's the relationships that are broken down, and the byproduct of that is the goal around it. So that's sometimes why they can go on for quite a long time, because what's going on is creating all the mood music around it. So in order to get to the place where you want to make the changes that occur. And that means changing the relationship dynamic, which Linda, you always give that, and I know the person you were talking about. And I remember that time, it was it was really hard work. And you did a lot of that work because the other person never had to before. And that was the stretch for them. And then it became a much more mutually respectful relationship, without a doubt. But in the end, change would be really easy if it wasn't for people. And negotiation is a contact sport of people.
So
Don't
what
you think that change is great if it's you that wants the change? It's not great if it's not you that's proposing the change.
No.
Because then it's something that somebody else has wished upon you.
Yeah.
And everybody's change is the greatest thing. This will make such a difference, in their opinion, but not necessarily. But that doesn't mean that their suggestion is wrong, and it doesn't mean that the people who don't wish to change are wrong. There's probably some truth in both sides.
Well, people don't mind change, but they do mind change without context, and they mind change where it's done to, not with and for. That's where it builds up resentment. And I think if you look about over the last couple of months around all of the changes, not just now, but around it, the changes around COVID, with COVID testing and the rules and stuff like that was very, very unsettling for a lot of people. And it's a bit like, if you can circle back, it's a bit clunky way of describing this, but you think about negotiations, like, well, hang on, we agreed this and now we've changed it. It's like, how do I trust you when you're not communicating with me? I don't know what your intent is because you keep changing. Now, those are the roads to ruin, because people think, do you know what, you just do you until you've got your act together. And it's been, and a really good example, and again, if I can use this one, is I was in Liverpool on Monday. I was speaking to 360 nurses at Aintree Range course, no one wearing masks, all, today I was in Worcester Hospital. There was only about 20 people in the room, all socially distanced, all wearing masks all the time. And that causes confusion. So how do you negotiate at strategic level, right through to operational level, when there is so much uncertainty around the place? Because it frustrates people, and people disengage when people say, well, as I was walking out, there was 12 ambulances wrapped around the emergency department. How do you negotiate, or how do we keep the people in the community safe when you've got nothing to bargain with, because you've just been, one thing after another is changing and the rules keep changing. So I'm not sure I'm articulating things very well, but it keeps going back to change is something that people are fine with. We underestimate how fine people are, because many of us on this call have had the biggest change of our lives, where you're doing, at the beginning, you're dealing with toxic wakes, sleep deprivation, and everything else. It's called having a baby. There is no bigger change. And people rush into it. They love the training that goes around it. And it's a negotiating the upturning of people's lives, and people want it because I think whatever it takes, I'm willing to give, because there's it's something that it matters to them enough to find a way to resolve all the challenges it will face, because they know there will be give and take with it. And one of the key characteristics of negotiations is the parties expect that there will be give and take. It's not binary, there will be. So people, and it's like Linda's observation about the car, you have to know what your red lines. What is the thing I will not? And here's the thing about givers and takers, is givers have to stop giving because takers will never stop taking.
I think that's probably something you need to say again, exactly how you said it just there.
Or we'll just cut that piece from the recording and just keep it
I
on a
think
loop.
we need to repeat that. Givers have to stop giving because takers will not stop taking. And what's going through my head now, as I'm sure is with many other people, is some of our, shall we call them high impact users, the people that are in day after day, multiple times a week, who want more. And you just can't, you can't feed that.
Well,
I was on a multi-agency meeting this week, and a former frequent attender was there. She's now recovered, and she was really gracious, and she said, you know, you've got to let people feel the consequences. You can't keep giving them what they say they want. And I was just blown away, because she was saying all the things we're told to do, and we don't feel like we can, because those patients, those people are so persuasive, but I want, and eventually someone gives in. She said it's like a slot machine. We'll keep putting the money in the slot because one day it might pay out. And so, you know, I'm thinking, goodness, this is insight. We need this. But so important, really, Brian. Stop giving all the time. You don't have to.
You're absolutely right. In fact, there's two quick parts. One of which is when I did my negotiating training in the with the RCN as a steward, and that was back when God was a boy. So it was like 1,500 years ago. One of the things they talked about was the broken record technique of negotiating. Just keep asking, and you see it with kids sometimes. They'll just keep asking until you think, oh, you've worn me down. And that is a not particularly good negotiating tactic, but it's one nonetheless. The more specific point about the high intensity users, what's been really successful in Canterbury in New Zealand is they have created a dedicated plan for each of those users, which the user signs off.
Yes, we've
done that. And what they found is a dramatic drop off in the usage, because they've actually got what they wanted. It wasn't what they needed. So it wasn't always what they wanted, but it's definitely what they needed, and it changed the behavior. Because sometimes it's actually they want to say, this is Emma saying, that's me in work trying to get storage space.
So can I have a new filing cabinet? Will you sign for that today?
Okay, it's only a cubicle, but it would make a great storage space.
Or when you have patients who think they're being treated in storage space because of the style of the shelving in the resus room.
No, you're kidding me.
No, I just
wish she was.
They thought they were being treated in a cupboard because of the shelving.
Yeah,
oh dear.
Because it was all pigeonholes along the wall with all the kit, and the patient thought they were in a storeroom. It was a department that I worked in years ago. We only had one resus bay, and
I can absolutely confirm that that I've seen Emma in action trying to negotiate storage space. It's poetry in motion.
That's lovely to hear. I was about to say, I bet you stood back in awe and say, Emma, respect. Where do you both work as a matter of interest?
We work for an Iron Bevan University Health Board, so Newport.
Newport.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Sorry, Linda, I think I derailed the points you were making earlier.
That was another country. What I was going to suggest really, or get people to think about the most recent negotiation that you've had that mattered to you, and what happened during that negotiation. And then when you thought about it, decide what you're courageous enough to share with us, and having kind of listened to this so far, what might you take on board? Have you nailed this? Might there be some things you might think about doing differently? You look like you're about to jump in, Claire.
I've got a shared one with Jan. And we both attend, I don't know if Jan's looking scared. We both attend a PGD panel. And there we are, Jan. Jan's fallen off her chair. And your words have really resonated with me tonight about we have to do a significant amount of negotiation. They're a very forensic panel, and think of all of the worst case scenarios and give Jan quite a hard time. And she has to go off and do the amendments. But it's really interesting about that sort of negotiation. But I think about understanding their lens and where they're coming from and the speciality that they're coming from, and actually sort of understanding that that this panel are not from an emergency care background. So some of the asks from the PGDs, you know, where Jan and I sort of give each other a knowing look to say, really? But actually, I think it's about just taking that step back and looking at the problem, and actually, in your negotiation skills, acknowledging that they will look at that problem in a very different way to myself and Jan. So to me, I'm just thinking about the PGD panels and the negotiations. And I might have nicked your example there, Jan, but I don't know whether you agree with me. That's a nod.
So what do you think it is that they're trying to get out of it?
It's almost as if that they are looking at all the risks from their perspective, isn't it? They are ultimately going to be signing off that PGD. They are taking the risks, signing it off. So you can see where, you know, there's sort of, it's a self-protecting and for the organisation and for themselves as individuals. So you can see, you know, where that may be a barrier to negotiation, but it's useful to sort of take a step back and understand that's where they're coming from, rather than sometimes there is a bit of clash of standpoint, isn't it? And then you get to the point where you can't move forward.
I think what happens is that we know our working environment, and we know the people who will be used, particularly for the nurse practitioners, who will be using these PGDs, and they don't know that, obviously. So things that are obvious to us, so we don't need to put them in because it wouldn't happen, because we don't work like that. They want these safeguards written in, you know, in block capitals sometimes almost, and it's really quite unnecessary because we know that would never happen. But you know, then you have to understand that that's where they're coming from to make sure it doesn't ever happen.
And part of this is about, and any negotiation, not just this, but this is a beautiful example of it, is how do you make it safe for people to engage? Because that's the first step, isn't it? You know, they're going to come into the negotiation guarded with monkey brain on full alert, unless you've already made it safe for them to engage with you, safe for them to connect. When you know that they've got these I's to dot, T's to cross scenarios to run in their head for it to be safe for them, you're pre-armed, aren't you? And you can think about that from their perspective. You can position your argument from that perspective, so they've got less to be on high alert about, in a way.
I'm glad you raised PGDs, because I've been thinking, what negotiation can I think of? But actually, if I think about the negotiations I did to get different PGDs in different organisations, and then if I contrast that against negotiating with X-ray to do X-rays from triage in 3 different organisations, it's so different. So, you know, if I think about organisation 1, X-ray were really on board, pharmacy were absolutely not. But hey ho, never mind, pootled our way through. Second organisation, X-ray totally on board, pharmacy a bit cautious. So we just had to nudge along with pharmacy. I think we got 5 PGDs out of pharmacy, but X-ray were like, okay, well, can we teach you? Yes, sure you can, no problem. Gift, really. Third organisation, pharmacy, absolutely on rails, totally with it. Even went to see the antibiotic pharmacists and the microbiologists, and they were entirely reasonable people. right, well, what would you do? You know, what drugs do you want? Well, no, you tell me, what drugs do you recommend? Because I'm not going to tell you which antibiotics are right. You tell me, if I give you the scenario, can you tell me the right drug for it? And would you sign it off on a PGD if I wrote one? So that was an easy discussion and an easy collaboration. We didn't really need to negotiate a lot. X-ray, jeepers, you'd have thought I asked for the moon. I mean, for crying out loud, the number of times we had to negotiate with X-ray, and every time we came up against, thou shalt provide an audit. And we would go, but why? You don't ask the doctors to. You don't ask the physios to. So why do you want an audit? They went away and thought about it. And then they came back and said, well, we'll need a 1,000-word reflective piece. Why? You don't ask the doctors to. But we ended up at almost total impasse. That we got everything else agreed, but that flaming audit, they wanted an audit or they wanted a reflective piece. And it's just like, no, we're professionals. If you've taught us, grand. I mean, if you want to do an audit of what we request and make sure we're not requesting off protocol, crack on, don't mind us. That's fine. But why would I keep a list of every single patient I've requested an X-ray on, and the result of that X-ray? What percentage are you expecting to get a positive hit on? Because if I get 90% positive, I've under X-rayed, haven't I? I've missed something. So what's a reasonable percentage? Where's your research evidence that says what percentage of my X-ray requests should be positive? And anyway, what is positive? Because actually, I want to X-ray for a foreign body, but it would be positive if there's nothing there, and negative if there is. So, you know, how are you measuring this? Jeepers, we went round and round and round and round and round and round and round. And I was thinking, oh, wish I was back in the other organisation. And then I thought, no, I don't, because pharmacy were a bit more tricky there. So, you know, you win some, you lose some. So I got 64 PGDs, no problem. But, well, no problem. You've got to put the work in. But the X-rays, Gordon Bennett.
So what does that teach you about negotiation?
I think, to be fair, well, I suppose if we go back to your rules, it was a bit more adult with pharmacy and the microbiologists. What they, you know, we were in an adult to adult situation where they said, what do you want? And I said, you decide if I give you the scenario. So that's me respecting their professional knowledge. With X-ray, I just think they were treating us like children, naughty children at that. And we didn't seem to get past that. We didn't seem to be able to be adults. I'd be very pleased to be told how to achieve being treated as an adult by radiography. But I think it boiled down to one member of staff. To be perfectly honest, I think there was one key member of staff, and that was her red line, that we had to provide an audit, and there was no way around that because she wouldn't allow it. That's what I think.
And I think
what was that about?
The lesson that comes out of this in terms of negotiation is it is almost always a human factor that gets in the way. It's very rarely fact. It's very rarely that one party or another party has got no wiggle room, no negotiation room. It's usually that there isn't the human to human understanding, and somebody doesn't feel safe. Somebody doesn't feel that they can move as far as the other people are asking. In that scenario, and I say this a little bit glibly, for me, it's always a scenario of, you know, keep your friends close and your enemies even closer. You know, really lean in, really get into what is it that is going to turn this person? What is it that they're really stuck with? And does that breach my red lines? And if it does, like the case of your audit and your, you know, what else can we come up with? You know, and that's where you come back to the point that Brian made about the Irish negotiations is, what's the value here? You know, what matters to them? What matters to us? What you said earlier, what problem are we trying to solve? And quite possibly, and you know, I didn't have the pain of, I relate, I had the pain of negotiating, even when there's plenty of empirical evidence from good research studies that say that nurse X-ray is safe, that it's often more appropriate than junior doctor X-ray, and so on and so on and so on. I've been through the same pain. But the thing is, you know, what is going to make it safe for her to engage? And that is about it's almost like a chunking with negotiation. We go down into the granular really, really quickly. And sometimes we need to chunk back up to the bigger picture to enable people to play again, because we get stuck. And I think when you get stuck in a negotiation, for me, that's always a kind of mental note to come back up, just take the temperature down, and let's look at the bigger picture, the value, what we're trying to achieve here. And sometimes it is as simple as saying, not in the case of the audit, but, you know, what is it you want? Because, you know, what is it that is important to you? Why does this really matter to you? And when you get into the why does it really matter to you, you've then got some dance room to say, well, actually, how about if we did this? Or how about if we did that? But when we're really entrenched in I need this from you, and actually it's completely unreasonable, there's nowhere to wriggle, is there?
And you're right. And in technical terms, there's two parts to successful negotiations. The one part is called the management of the tangibles. So that's the management of getting the result of the PGD. It's the price, whatever that price is, you know, that's paid, what the terms are, you know, that's the management of the tangibles. The resolution of the intangibles is probably more important. And what that's about is and as Linda's talking about really, is what are the underlying psychological motivations, such as this person, and let's stick with the individual there, them feeling a sense of loss of status, a loss of control, a loss of face, you know, and over time, it's the resolution of the intangibles that is much more important than the management of the tangibles. It's because when it comes to change, and you know, it's actually rarely about the change. It's not about the thing. It's about something else, and it's about finding it. But what we often talk about, though, is we want people to buy into a change. But really what we need them to do is become, instead of buyers, we need them to become investors. And so when you go to a panel, for example, pardon?
We've had that issue in merging two teams, negotiating, you know, in a common place of two teams to get together. You know, and a common involving everybody in a team, don't go it alone. And you know, even rebranding sometimes that's helped us.
Yeah,
so that it gives a common theme.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And something I do is I tend to so panel, for example, is I tell people my office is a coffee shop. If you go to their place, you are on their turf, in their territory. You are metaphorically on the back foot. If they come to yours, they are in your territory. So creating a neutral space. And because we are wired as human beings by the law of reciprocity, if I buy you a coffee, subconsciously you are wired to want to give me something back by way of reciprocity. And I've always found that if you spend time one-to-one finding out about people, what motivates them, what inspires, you know, what their worries are, actually what you could essentially do, and it costs me a lot in coffee, is actually going around the panel and finding what is their motivations and learning in advance what are the things they want. But also, let's stick with the PGDs is a very good example, is, all right, what is it that what they want? And can I ask them to invest in this PGD by helping us understand what they're looking for? So when you go to the panel, you've already answered the questions and their concerns and their worries and their fear of losing face. You've already been managing the intangibles so that you get, and the last point I'll make is this, is about also involving people of influence whose just the use of their name can help open doors or get things smoothed. So I remember literally, as a clinical director of the emergency department, finding the chief medical officer, finding the director of nursing, Kathy, finding the clinical director for medicine and microbiology, and say, this is what we're doing. Would you be happy to sign it? And I remember literally meeting the medical director at the lift and saying, sign here, trust me, this has all been signed. Kathy's happy, the microbiologist is happy. That their names were enough for him to say, I'm going to something, I'll sign it, I'm sure it's fine. And because I'd spent time building trust with him, and he was a hyper detail, person, there was enough trust to say, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. But that takes time. You can't build trust overnight. It takes years to build trust, and you can break it in seconds. So you have to keep working. This is what all negotiations are. They're lessons in trust. Whose name have we dropped there, Emma? I'm dying to know now.
No, they're in conversations using somebody's name, like you said, the people you've bumped into, and the power, the big hitters, the decision makers. So you having those names, having those people to support you, and bringing that into the conversation can be really powerful and persuasive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, knowing that Bill Clinton was the sponsor of the Northern Ireland Peace Agreement actually was going to get much further than the likes of John Major and others. You've suddenly got, and interestingly, Joe Biden, speaking of the peace, he's saying to the British government, do not break the Northern Ireland Protocol, because the price of that, if they do that, there will be a price to pay. And for Britain, that price will be not getting a free trade agreement with America. So there has to be a price to pay for failure as well. And it has to be painful enough that it keeps people around the table.
So do you think now is a good moment to do your pen exercise, Brian?
I reckon. So, so what I'd like you to do is we're going to put, actually, since this is Zoom and you're the host, Jeanette, we've got 6, perfect. So what I'd like you to do is go into 3 rooms of 2. Linda and I won't be in the room. You can create 4 rooms of 2, but you can, Linda and I won't join the room. And what we'd like you to do is 3 rooms of 2 randomly. And what we'd like you to do with your neighbor is you all have a pen, you've got a pen handy, one beside you. And what we'd like you to do is sell your pen to your neighbor. And you've got about a couple of minutes, and your life depends on you selling your pen to your neighbor. So,
and do we have to sell it? Oh, okay, well, that's just the limit of the instructions. So let's see.
That's the limit of the instruction.
All right, breakout rooms. I'm going to assign manually, because otherwise I'm going to run into a problem, because I've got to keep you and Linda together.
Unless you want to share the hosting with me, and I'll do it for you.
Oh, that's better. Yeah.
And then we can
hang on. Let me see if I don't have to do that often. So let me just work that one out.
So if you just go into participants and click my name.
Yeah, click your name, Linda. Yeah, more. Make host. There you go, Linda. You are now the host.
Excellent.
The power I've just handed over.
I'm loving the fact that, Emma, you've gone into training with a beer. Good on you, woman.
Yeah, I wish I thought that.
Love your work. I know, I was just thinking the same way. The cup of tea was fine, but it's probably, it must be wine o'clock. I love your work.
I noticed Claire's done a runner.
Gone to get a pen.
Just a fen.
Gone to get the best pen.
All good.
I've got to get a bit though.
Right, you should find yourselves disappearing off any second now. So how long did you want them to, Brian, to have?
Say 3 or 4 minutes you do it for each party to sell their pen to their next neighbour.
So
3,
2
4, 5
minutes, and I'll drop into a little message to you saying swap if you haven't, and then we'll bring you
Yes,
back
good
in
idea.
4 minutes. Have fun.
And I'll pop down to you, Linda.
You don't need to do anything.
No, that's right. Yeah, so it's just
should be able to.
You're on mute, Linda.
Thank you. I was just going to say, you can always tell who's negotiating the hardest. They're the last to come back into the room.
Oh.
Lost them.
Yep.
They'll automatically come back any second now.
They said goals.
They're not good timekeepers.
Oh, Brian's saying that he can't hear anyone.
You can't hear anyone, Brian?
I can hear now. I've just changed the put it out to ordinary speakers.
That would probably be operator error.
Yeah, I'll definitely 100% operator error. And by the way, I ran downstairs, left my reading glasses downstairs, and popped under another pair, so that might look odd in the edit, but trust me. So I'm going to
At least you can read.
I'm handing you the host back, Jeanette.
Oh, are you? Okay, that's kind of you. Thank you.
So let me ask you the question. I suspect there was an awful lot of horse trading going on there in the last few minutes. So what was your experience of selling your pen to each other? Let's start with Jeanette. Who were you?
I was selling. Do you know what I've got? I've got a black permanent marker. You know, the only one in the department that the surgeon needs to mark the limb. That was my pitch.
By the way, who were you?
That was my pitch. I was selling to Claire.
To Claire.
And the best she could offer me was a swap for a pen she's had for a while. I didn't agree. But she then tried to sell me her pen, and we then tried to go back to negotiating a swap. And I was just thinking, really, I do think the currency of the only permanent marker in the department is higher than a pen she's had for a while.
I was trying my best because I desperately wanted that permanent marker. But my product was, you know, nowhere near that. But I was trying to big it up, you know.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Fiona, how about you?
Well, I was with Emma, and certainly she had what sounded like a very fancy pen, and it had an awful lot of advantages for being for a nurse, in that it had a tracker device and it never ran out of ink, and it was black. However, I did mention that maybe having so many parts like this, it could actually fall asunder. You know, it could actually fail because it's and I was trying to sell her my pencil because it you can use it at any angle to write it, and it still work whether you're writing against the wall, upside down, or anything else. And it is a nice bright yellow pencil, and very good for taking notes. The charcoal wasn't too heavy, so it wouldn't mess up the paper when you scrubbed it out. So that's as far as we got.
Very good. What about you, Emma?
I was trying to sell her my super duper pen, my imaginary pen, because I haven't got a pen in front of me, that was all singing, all dancing, had a tracker so you couldn't lose it. You could have an app on your phone to track it down if somebody pinched it, and it was a Dyson of pens, so it never ran out of ink. But yeah, we didn't get as far as the price. And then she came back to me with the pencils, which was more of a suitable budget for a nurse.
Very good. Jan, how about you?
Well, Ross started off and she had such a super pen that I was really at a complete and utter disadvantage with my very, very simple pen. But my winning streak, I think, was that it couldn't lose a top because it's one of those, and it was free. That was my winning pitch, that it was free.
How about yours? What was your arguing? Yeah, coming back.
Mine had a torch on the end, which is so good when you're in the triage room looking at the pupils, you know. And mine was black because we have to have a black pen, and I wanted to know what kind of pen Jan liked, and she did like this shape of this one, and the thin bit, so it's nice to hold. And it also had a laser thing on it, so you could draw, you know, like an eyeball or something like that, easy onto the notes.
I had no answer to all of this.
Linda's commenting just sounds just what you need in ED. So let me ask
That was
you
the
all-
tracker. I think,
Yeah,
you know,
that's
I
right,
sort of
yeah,
put
yeah.
something in pen. You don't put it down anywhere, really, did you?
Yeah, so, especially one that's like that shape, yeah. It's unique. So let me ask you all, as you were all busy selling your pens with all their various features, from trackers to, you know, amazing ones made from, I suspect, an Amstel bottle and everything else, and that's the one that the only ones that the surgeons will use as your sales pitch. How many of you asked the other person what it is they wanted to buy? Because
No.
the thing is, we don't like to be sold, but we do like to buy. So in a sense, it is an exercise in negotiation, because have you ever, and you see this mostly, I think, in clothes shops, types of clothes shops, where you just walk in, you're only over the threshold, and they say, "Can I help you?" And you're going, "No, actually, I think I'll just walk," because you don't want people selling at you. You want to buy, but you want to take the time to buy. And when you were trying to negotiate or trying to, you know, sell something, all you're doing is just setting off the antibodies and people backing away. And here's the other thing: it's not the evidence that gets you over the line. We don't make our decisions rationally. We make decisions emotionally and apply post hoc rationalization to justify what can be a terrible decision. I can only think of Trump as an example. You know, you look at the evidence, but you've got a lot, 70% of people who vote Republican thinks the election was stolen in the face of all of the evidence, because we now, truth isn't enough, evidence isn't enough. It helps, it informs, but it's not the biggest determinant. So when we're looking now, if you said to me, would you like to buy my pen? The pen that was given to me from Linda for my birthday, I would say, I don't need another pen, I've got loads of them. But if you said, could you make use of this? And say, well, actually, it would make a fantastic bookmark. If it gets too cold, I can use it as a door jamb. In fact, I could use it as that's not a bad old ruler. So I've got another pen, but actually I don't have a ruler, so I could use it for that. Now, suddenly, I'm actually quite interested in what you're saying, because I could make use of this. Can you see where it comes into negotiation? What is it the other person wants? Because it may well be that you don't need to give them as much because they have more modest needs than you thought. And you sometimes find this with negotiations. You also find it with managers who don't wait to find out what the staff actually want, and their needs are more humble than they thought. So it's important to find what people want, and the features and benefits are not all what it's about. Find what their why is.
We all fell for that, didn't we? You said sell each other a pen.
Yes, I did.
And we did exactly what you said, forgetting that the lecture is about negotiation, and you'd already given us all the rules we had to follow, and we just ignored them totally and went with the verb sell.
And this is part that Claire didn't, did you? Claire did say that she had asked. But this is the thing, isn't it? That, you know, when we are not under pressure, when we're having a nice relaxed evening, talking with our peers, we still default to habitual behaviour. When we're under pressure or the stakes are really high for us, it's even easier to fall into that habitual behaviour.
It's really interesting, you know, because this is something we do wrong with patients. We make assumptions about what patients want, and we don't actually bother to say, Mrs. Miggins, what would you like to do?
Yeah.
Because you're right, Brian, Mrs. Miggins' requirements are actually much humbler than we think they are. They might be less difficult, they're less easy to achieve. You know, Mrs. Miggins just wants to go home, and you think never in a pig's eye, but let's see where we can come to somewhere along the line. you know, at least you know where Mrs. Miggins' starting point is. She wants to go home. Yeah. Okay, Mrs. Miggins, well, that's fine. Have you got someone who can stay the night with you? Because now we've fixed your busted arm. We really do need someone with you overnight because you've had that anaesthetic in your arm. Right. So you mean I can't? So, you know, so it's a bit clearer, isn't it? And we always forget to do that. We forget to ask the patient what they want. We just tell them what they've got to do.
You're right, and it ties into negotiations because while we take no risks, our patients take all the risks. And one of the biggest risks they face is actually being in hospital itself. 60% of patients in hospital experience functional decline. You know, we used to say to people, go to hospital, you'll be safe. And now we're going, yeah, about that. And if you spend too long on a trolley as an older person, you will lose about 1% of aerobic capacity, which is ability to pick up a cup of tea. So by the time they've got off the ambulance, they've already deconditioned. But what we don't do is find out what their appetite for risk is. And the same thing happens with, you know, the more formal negotiations, understanding what the other person's appetite for risk is. So Claire was saying really clearly, yeah, I'd really love that pen. I may not have much of a bargaining chip with my pen, but what can I do? What is it that Jeanette wants that I've got that she really needs, that she's maybe willing to waiver and maybe rent me the pen? Because it isn't just about buying and selling, it could be lending and renting and all kinds of things. So that means being flexible, and Linda, it circles back to Linda's point about thinking in the moment. And like everything, it's something that gets better with practice. The more you practice it, the more you get better at it. I remember a negotiation. There was an emergency nursing meal. It was during RCN Congress, and the service was atrociously bad. It was so terrible. A bunch of us were out. I don't know if you were there, Linda. I don't think you were. It was many years ago at Congress, and they put a 10% on the bill, and I said, "Well, I'm not going to pay it." And one person said, "Well, how the hell do you kind of get them to not charge us?" I said, "I'll deal with it." So I went up and said, "Oh, our service was terrible. We don't think we should pay for the food, for the service charge, because we spent next 45 minutes just waiting for you to take our orders. So if it's okay with you, we're going to take that off, because, you know, a tip means to ensure promptness. You didn't do that. So hopefully you're okay about that." Meaning, hopefully you're okay about this because we're going to do this anyway. And the other person said, "I would never be brave enough to do this." We do it all the time. It's not a biggie. So the more you do, the easier you get. But also it's a very low risk thing to do it on. Selling a pen is a low risk strategy. And the more you practice these things, you get it. You know, people don't turn up at the negotiation table for countries. And Senator George Mitchell, they've been practicing this stuff for years. Low risk, more informed risk, better risk. And what is the one thing that negotiators do in hostages? They establish a rapport with the hostage taker. Find out what is it they want, what matters to them. What would they like to buy? Sorry, Linda, I know you're going to come in there.
I was just going to pull some of that together a bit, really, in that we often wait until the stakes are too high before we think about our negotiating tactics. And, you know, when when our backs are against the wall and we're trying to negotiate for another member of staff, and somebody's not paying for agency and we cannot deliver the service, that's not the time to start practicing negotiating. The time to start practicing negotiating is when you need to sell a pen to your friend. But actually, when you think about life, most interactions are a negotiation of some sort or another. We don't see them in those terms because we label them as an argument at home, buying something, you know, and so on and so on. But actually, if we started to look at everything that we did all of the time, we're probably very skilled negotiators in parts of our life already. And so some of it is, you know, what am I good at? What do I feel comfortable with? How do I transfer that into situations where I possibly feel a little bit more vulnerable? What have I got in my in my armory that I can use, because we're very good at siloing our skills and abilities, and we're very skilled as rounded human beings when we use everything that we have. And just going back to where we really started from at the beginning of today, even something like Call Me is a negotiation. It sounds so very simple, but actually, if you are being called your wrong name over and over and over and over, it gradually starts to erode your sense of self, your self-confidence. But it also erodes your trust in the people that keep doing that. You know, if they haven't even noticed that, or if they can't get that bit right, what else are they going to get wrong? You know, am I safe here? And so that simple negotiation at the beginning of an interaction with somebody is, what would you like me to call you? Establishes that rapport. It starts to build that trust. It gives the other person in the negotiation that feeling and sensation that they're significant, they matter, and what they think and feel matters to you. So all of a sudden, that connection's established. Our brains are sloshing around oxytocin and dopamine. We're more predisposed to collectivism and harmony and fixing stuff than if our guard's up because they don't even know what to call us, or they've left us waiting and not spoken to us, ignored us, or actually they've come in here all bristly because they want something from us. So if we just get into that habit of rapport, connection, then negotiation. And like when I first started Health Service 360, you know, it was great to start with because we were doing all emergency care stuff and people knew us both, and it was, you know, it was quite smooth. And then as we started to move beyond emergency care, even Brian wasn't quite as famous as he is. And so we actually had to start to learn a bit about selling and how do you sell to people. And I remember going to this conference one day and this guy was saying to me, well, nobody likes to be sold to. You know, think about it. You go in and buy a car and somebody comes on, you know, your guard's up immediately is, what are they trying to con me into? But actually, if we let you browse around and come up with what you want and give you an opportunity to buy, we all love buying things. Even if we have buyer's remorse afterwards, in the moment, we love the act of buying. So how do we create a negotiation that enables people to buy the thing that they want, whether it be a pen, whether it be being called by their right name, whether it be waiting with a bit less stress in the waiting room, whether it be giving you the X-ray requesting permissions that you're looking for. There's a whole lot of stuff that we like buying. So I use a really simple three little things that help me to stay on track about to get that bit of what does the other person want? What do they want to buy? And that is really super simple. Ask, tell, ask. So ask the person what is important to them. Ask them what they're looking for out of this. Tell them how you can accommodate that. And it isn't necessarily the same as giving them exactly what they wanted, but it is this kind of, okay, so, you know, you want me to get all of this delivered with none of our own stuff and just agency. Well, this is what I can do. This is what I really need to deliver it. So you've started with something that is close to what they want. And then you've included your red line in the, this is what I need bit. And then you ask them, are you happy with that? How do we move forward from here? So you're not actually telling them, you're giving them a choice, but you're framing it in a way that invites them to come back and say, yes, I'm happy with that, or actually I need you to do this. It's much harder when you kind of come at it with that sort of language for them to just say, no, actually, they've got to be the bad guy and they've got to break that rapport and connection, and that feels horrible. And as you've all just nicely proved, it's very easy for us to just fall back into a default pattern. So they're unlikely to fall back into that, no, I'm going to break the connection pattern. How does that sound?
It's going to need practice.
Yes.
Absolutely, it's going to need practice. Everything needs practice. It needs a bit of reprogramming. And so it becomes easy. And I think it's about how you, or rather where you put your focus. Because if you focus on, this is going to be difficult, well, probably it is, but if you start to put your focus on oh, look, I'm negotiating and this led to that and that happened, your brain is going, oh, I'm recognizing this pattern now, or I'm recognizing this pattern. And that's how you build up, what is it, your 10,000 hours of practice to become an expert. You know, if you can focus on it while you're doing it, you concertina that time enormously, because your brain is so overloaded that it's looking for patterns all the time. If you give it a nice, easy pattern, it'll go, yeah, got that, know how to do that now. But if you go in with this sort of ickiness every time you have to go into a negotiation, you're on high alert, you've got high levels of cortisol and adrenaline, your brain stands no chance of creating a new pattern because it's in that kind of survival mode. So it is, as Brian absolutely rightly said, is start where the stakes are low and gradually build up and get the practice in.
Because it is a muscle, so it is. And you think about it, the world's superpower negotiators are toddlers. So they are brilliant at it. You know, whether it's the broken record technique or if then, you know, if you let me stay up half an hour, I promise I will then go to bed, or, you know, immediately. You know, so and they don't think they're negotiating. That's what they're going at. They have got a goal and they will press every button they can to sort of find what it is. And they'll skip between mum and dad, or mum and mum, or mum, dad, as the case will be, you know, till they get it. They will find, where is the weak parts under the, you know, that I can get. The other thing, circling back to Linda's point about patterns, is, do you remember when we all learned to drive, how hard it was, especially the manual? You really put a lot of energy into it, and because it had a high cognitive load. Have you ever driven home and not remembered most of your journey?
Mm-hmm.
And what that's about is the pattern, that if you like, the neural pathways, because about 80% of what we do is semi-automated. You know, later on when you're brushing your teeth, I bet you will use the same hand to brush your teeth as you did last night, the night before, that. When you're tying your shoelaces in the morning, you will go to a favorite foot. You know, we do stuff we are creatures of habit. So what I'd like you to do is, if you have a pen, and Emma will have to use her very special, or a piece of paper as well with your pen, and Emma, you'll have to use your very, very special pen, is I'd just like you to just write down your name, write your signature. That's it, just write your signature. All done? So what did it feel like doing that? Did you have to think about it? You just got on and wrote your signature. Now I'd like you to do the same thing with your non-dominant hand. Now, and still going. Emma's, yours looks shocking. I mean, gosh, with your non-dominant super hands. The thing is, I bet it felt, I'm guessing it'll feel clunky, awkward. Your pen didn't feel natural in your hand. Well, that's a metaphor for change. But if, heaven forbid, you were to break your dominant hand and you were in plaster for 6 weeks and all you could do was use your non-dominant hand to sign your signature, after a while it would get easier and easier, and eventually it would become fluid. So as you practice, it gets easier and it becomes less like, I am concentrating at doing this thing, and more, this is just going with the flow of what I do. And negotiations is a bit like that. We negotiate all the time, every day. We just don't call it that. Could you swap a shift? We're really stuck. It's negotiation. Linda?
I think I have nothing on that really, except to ask, you know, what have you got out tonight? What have you learned? What are you going to go out and do differently tomorrow? Or maybe even as soon as you get off the call.
Would you make me a cup of tea? The Irish for no, as Fiona knows, is I will, yeah. Mary, would you make me a cup of tea? I will, yeah. John.
And there's me all these years thinking it was now in a minute.
Well, I promise I'll bring you a glass of wine now in a minute, Linda.
So that means she's not getting that tonight.
Absolutely.
So what are your takeouts?
I've written a lot of notes and there's quite a lot there to go through and go over.
Be clear.
But I think for me, it's check what the other person wants.
Yeah, asking.
Ask.
I think it's establishing the problem and making that very clear, and questioning the assumptions, because now I'm thinking, my brain's going back to numerous negotiations. We've gone through quite a big reconfiguration, haven't we, in an Iron Bevan, and I'm thinking, actually, were we talking about the same problem? I'm actually questioning now whether we were. That's so I think establishing the problem is something that I haven't done in previous negotiations, making sure that we're coming from it from the same perspective and question those assumptions. So absolutely.
Excellent.
Fiona,
Dad, we're going back to that PGD panel with different perspective, aren't we?
buy them a lot of coffee. Fiona, I thought you were going to say something a moment ago.
Oh, it's just that check what they want. Don't assume you know what they want.
Yeah. I think it was.
Sorry, Brian.
So no, please go ahead.
I was just going to ask if anyone else had got anything else that they were going to go and do differently, but carry on.
No, feel free. No, that's a good question to be. I've got a point I'll make towards the end. So what would you do differently? I mean, Claire's going to go back.
Some people have already sort of taken that. It's just, had anybody else got anything else to add?
Also, that's what I'm saying. Sorry.
Looks like the ball's yours again then.
So I think there's really a point, and Linda is outstandingly good at this, not just personally, but as a coach and in all kinds of way. And I think if there's one takeaway to give about the art of negotiation, careful listening is the underestimated star of the negotiation show. And it isn't just what is said, it's how it is said, the nuances around it. It's the really, really careful, active listening, because something crucial can come out of a throwaway point. And when we leak, especially, this is what's made it so hard this last couple of years now with dealing with Zoom and team meetings, is we're missing the soft visual cues.
Yeah.
You know, if you're meeting somebody and you're talking to somebody and you're talking and you're standing up, and you're trying to, looking to see if you can get something done, look at their feet. If their feet are pointing away, they want to get away. They are giving a non-verbal cue is, I've got something to do. I need to get away from here, especially if you've been talking for a couple of minutes. If their feet are pointing at you, they are right there with you in that space. You see it sometimes when people are meeting at a party or an event. What I always keep an eye on is their feet, and when their feet are going in the opposite direction, that's time for me to withdraw, because actually what you still got is the relationship, the rapport, and all of that sort of stuff. That's a little thing. It's a little petty. Almost, I'm not saying it's a petty thing. It's not a petty thing, but it's a tiny little thing. But all of these things accrete into rapport and good listening.
And I think that that would be my that would be my final kind of thought on the matter as well, is even more than just listening, is just pay attention to all of what is going on around you. I fundamentally believe that people tell you what they need, not necessarily with their words,
Right.
but with their behavior, the way they show up to stuff, how they engage with you. They'll tell you where they are in the negotiation spectrum, and you'll be able to see how much work, how much more questioning, how much more you need to do to get them at the party in the first place, or when they're at the party, to into that space where you're in the negotiation zone. So you're above your red line, and they're above their red line, and you've got a conversation. When you think you've got agreement, or when you think you've got what you need, shut up and close the deal, if you like. And then I'm constantly but surprised by how many people talk themselves back out of what they wanted because they don't stop, or they feel icky about saying, okay, have we got a deal? Is it, oh, you know, might not use the word deal, but are we moving forward with this? And because they feel uncomfortable about that last little bit of assertiveness, they keep talking, and so the circle begins again. So know when you've got what you want, and have the courage to close it and move on from there. And then you can go back into niceties if you want to, but make sure you've got your agreement over what you want sealed first.
Yeah. I remember the very first one, Lynn and I first went into business, 2001, and met new accountants for the very first time. And this guy, Nick, he said, now here's a mistake. This is something that you should do, is when you say to the client how much it's going to cost, and then shut up. Because too often what people say, oh, and of course, and the reason it is cost is this, and then you are, and before you know it, and I watched somebody who worked for me do this. He was a consultant, and he was in a trust I was working in, and he reduced his own fee in the middle of his own negotiation. So he ended up doing 5 days work for the price of 4. And I said to this person afterwards, what the hell was you doing? He said, I wanted the job. I said, they wanted you. They were going to pay you what you wanted. And actually now you've not only lost face, you've also lost influence. And he never fully recovered it.
It's that power of the silence, isn't it? Silence can make us feel really uncomfortable, but actually silence is processing time. And it is, you know, it is sometimes that just hold your nerve and wait for the other person to process and to come back with something. You know, when particularly when, as I said earlier, that like a monkey's driving the bus, we kind of have to keep bouncing it and going and going and going. The power is in the pause, the power is in the silence. And like, that's one of the things that I've really, and it sounds a really trivial example, I've really learned over the pandemic on Zoom is, you know, when you're running a workshop, and a bit like you, Jeanette, I've been on Teams most of the day teaching. And when you get a group that's really quiet, the temptation is to keep giving and giving and giving and let them take and take and take, isn't it? Which is, as Brian pointed out, terrible negotiation. The power is in the pause. If you just sit there silent for long enough, somebody will speak, because they are as uncomfortable as you are. But in our desire to fix stuff and make it better, you know, that moment where we're negotiating with a member of staff, that moment where we're negotiating about what's possible in the waiting room, the moment when we're saying, no, this patient needs to come to you now, you know, in that moment of silence, we're uncomfortable and we jump in and fill it and lose our power in the negotiation. So don't be afraid of the silence.
That's really that's really resonated with me. I think sometimes there's a tendency to over justify, isn't it, your argument, and laying out your stall, and you have to identify the bit where you have to zip.
Yes,
and put it back out there for people to process what you've said. Yeah, that's really resonated with me.
And you know, you can also use humor if you time it right, because it's back in a sense what Lynn's describing is timing. And I was in Worcester today, and it was we had a real problem with IT. It's one of why I'd rung Linda about the PowerPoint, and it's
Remote IT department over here.
That's right. She seriously is, and actually you fixed it, but it was 40 minutes lost. So by that time, the energy of the room had dissipated completely because people were not unreasonably. They'd been there from about 10 to 9, and it was 9:30 before it got started for a whole bunch of reasons, which actually were not in my control. However, they had lost the energy and were a very quiet group initially. So I'd asked a question fairly early on, and all I was getting was silence. And I thought, we're not going to get past silence on this particular occasion. So when I'm faced with that, what I'll say is, right, would you now all like to hold hands and contact the living? And what it does, it's a real circuit breaker of laughter, and then people will open up. Because when people feel that when they feel laughed, they can relax and they can feel safe to start talking. And it's not something that, it's just having different tools in the tool bag, but brilliant interviewers on the radio and on things like Newsnight, they'll ask a question and they'll pause and they'll pause and they'll pause, and then the politician blinks and they start blurting out. And those are often the most powerful interviews they do. Because dead time is the most scary thing on a radio that you can have. And on radio 4, an alarm goes off after 5 seconds. But radio 3, it's 20 seconds, because some of those symphonies can have really long pauses in the interludes. But it is built into the BBC alarm. Silence is something that you don't want. But if you're negotiating, it's one of the most powerful tools you can use.
That feels like a really good point to hand back to you, Jeanette.
Absolutely.
Thank you both very much. And I'm going to say, Brian, 2
I owe
hours on
Linda.
the nail. You said we won't be here for 2 hours. Oh,
No.
yes, we were.
Yes, we were. Yes, we were. I did run down to Linda, by the way, and I can just say, to give it, say this publicly. I said that to Linda while you were telling your pets, Linda, I so owe you. So I want to give my personal thanks to Linda for stepping in and making us a great evening.
That was a good team.
Yeah.
It's lovely to connect with you
Thank
again.
you.
It really was.
Yeah.
Good.
So,
Well, thank you both very, very much. That's great. I'm struggling now because I'm supposed to, at this point, say what the next lecture is in 2 weeks' time, and I can't for the life of me remember. But we'll not worry about that because it'll be on the website and you can work it out from there if you're watching on catch up. But for tonight, thank you, Brian, and thank you, Linda, for a very enjoyable session on the art of negotiation.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.
I